Welcome to episode number 16 of Conversations for the End. Today's guest is Brian O'Loughlin. Brian is a coach who works with successful men and women who feel disconnected from themselves, their lives, and those they love. His work is rooted in helping people drop out of striving and performance and into a life of clarity, soul connection, and purpose. He does this through embodiment, systems, and deep inner truth, a coaching framework he created after 16 years in the wellness industry. He's helped over 20,000 people worldwide, and right now he is in the process of writing his first book and has just released his first course, Create a New Way of Living. His sole purpose in life is to show people what's possible and to help them remember who they are. This was a lovely episode, and Brian is such a lovely guy. We talk a lot about acceptance of the unknown in many different aspects of this one, and we had a few tech issues sort of prior and during the episode. So yeah, we finally got it on tape, but it is a testament to sort of embodying what we were both speaking about at times. And that ultimately, guys, is what it is all about. But yeah, Brian is a gem in the sort of self-development space. It's probably narrowing it down to call it that, but he is an absolute gem in what he does. One I feel lucky to have found and to have connected with. What I really love about Brian is he speaks with a mix of authenticity, sincerity, and also this kind of curiosity that I don't think you see a lot nowadays in this kind of area, which is he's open to growing and to learning and to developing, and he does not claim to have all the answers. And I think that is fantastic and refreshing to see. So I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. I'm going to keep it brief because someone left a YouTube comment saying I yammer on these bits. But yeah, subscribe to the YouTube, follow on Instagram and TikTok, and yeah, I hope you enjoy. Without further ado, Brian O'Loughlin. Brian, welcome to the show.
We're in, are we?
We're in, yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Brian and I have been battling a whole host of technical issues over the last few days, but this, I think, is third time's the charm. We'll call it third time. Okay, Brian, let's jump straight in. Okay, so tell me, is there a moment in your life where you reached a kind of turning point, some sort of failure, some sort of obstacle, where your kind of perception, your approach to both coaching and life kind of changed?
Yeah, so many key pivotal moments in my life. And actually, it's funny you said they're coaching and life because fundamentally it's always life. And if I was to pick one, because there's so many, I would have to pick my initial loss of identity and kind of pivotal shift in life when I was about 22 to about 26, where I had shoulder pain. And it was a worldview change that genuinely fundamentally shifted me as a man forever. I think I wouldn't be the man I am if it wasn't for that case. And between the age of 22 and 26, I had shoulder pain that was pretty debilitating. And looking in hindsight, what I struggled with was a lot more than just the shoulder pain itself. Emotionally, it really impacted me. My relationships, it impacted me. In hindsight, again, at the time, I didn't realize it, but I was depressed. I was lost. I went to so many different people, physios, experts to try and fix my shoulder. They had the quote unquote answer for me, yet it didn't work for me. So I felt that there was something wrong in regards to me specifically. What is wrong with me? Because it's not actually working for my specific shoulder issue and pain. And that's what the fundamental shift happened when I began moving pain free. I did a weekend course called ZUU, ZUU, which is a really high intense bodyweight course. And I got through that weekend course relatively pain free. And it was the first time in 4 years I genuinely believed I could one day move pain free. And it changed everything. I bought a pair of gymnastic rings. I began to invest in myself, train a different way, learn. I got myself moving pain free, but just that belief that I could actually one day potentially move pain free changed everything. And then from that standpoint, it changed my trajectory in terms of my career, what I actually ended up doing, literally the work that I'm doing today with clients. But that was one of many, many things where I had a certain belief, experience, emotion, identity, and that worldview was just fundamentally shifted forever. So it was horrifically awful for 4 years, but I suppose fundamentally necessary to be the man I am today.
So it was that kind of course was in that moment. You got how did that come to you? How did that? Because that's quite a big moment. You're in a place where you feel like I am going to be injured, I'm going to be in pain. This is going to be a permanent fixture in my life, and then, as you've said, this kind of shift in perception, being able to imagine yourself as pain free, has opened up all these doors, all these experiences, all these connections with different people. Now, that's there's quite a lot to be gained in a perception shift there, it would seem. How did that come to you? Was it like an epiphany? Was it like gradually over time? What can people, if people kind of in this situation, maybe in some aspect of their life, if they're feeling a bit stuck, where should they be trying to, tease this out of themselves in some sense?
If we look at even just say the physical pain, so people might be watching this and it could be a literal pain for a year, 2, 3, 4. So I don't know if I would say it was an epiphany moment, but it certainly was a wake up call in the sense of maybe looking at the world and my experience of pain and therefore what I'm doing in my life from a different lens. So there was an epiphany of one day I could move pain free, but then from that moment, everything just looked different. I began to explore differently. I began to act differently, learn differently, and just began to question many beliefs. Fundamentally, I believe were true. I was being told by society, by quote unquote experts, were true, and then they just fundamentally weren't really. So I suppose my only thing I can say for people is because I think we're always looking for these moments of life of that one epiphany that we can get that changes everything. But I think fundamentally what it did was just allow me drop deeper into myself and therefore question everything, not just about my pain or my shoulder, but actually about life in general. I began to look at society and myself and people around me and go, well, wait a second, do I have to take everything as face value? Because I did for 4 years. I believe certain things by what I was told by, again, experts. And then this is all in hindsight in regard to the emotions and the breakdowns. At the time, I didn't realize how all consuming this pain was. So through, again, this new lens and exploration over time, and that was what, I don't know, 16 years ago now? It's just fundamentally changed kind of everything. So really what I would just encourage people to do is just to question the narrative that you're being given. Although you may not be getting the result, whatever that might look like in your life, whether it's a physical, mental, emotional, professional, personal one, it's that, there's other questions you can ask. There's other people that are doing things, and therefore, there's possibility that you may not see right now, but I'm encouraging you to question and ask and look for.
Yeah, I think it's crucial. I work obviously in mental health, generally speaking, with people in crisis, and that is something that I see as a very common theme. People will tell themselves a story, either in the similar sort of vein of yours, I guess, which is I have this thing, this is affecting me, this is my future, sealed, signed, delivered, or in the aspect of there might be some element of the unknown, and they will then their brain perhaps automatically puts a story on the unknown to make sense of it, and that story, based on their previous life experiences, can be quite negative, can be quite sort of self critical, and then again these sort of the world becomes smaller, limitations become more intense, and you can't help but get the feeling that they are missing out on perhaps opportunities and all the things that you were opened up to, by kind of changing that narrative, flipping the script on your own experience. So kind of segueing there, because you did touch on the fact that, there was obviously not just a physical pain, but, you mentioned depression. There was obviously some sort of emotional pain there. And I'm assuming to kind of cover these two at once, there was perhaps this change in what you were doing with your life, moving into this kind of new vocation, and then a change in your kind of mental state and perhaps the way you were engaging with your kind of inner world. Can you tell me a little bit about that and how that shift sort of happens?
Yeah. So again, this is all hindsight and from kind of living my experience and kind of helping people and ultimately helping myself was that I believe what happened over that 4 year period, I went from a very heightened nervous system fight or flight state to a bit more grounded rest and digest being state. So that worldview allowed me to drop into myself fully. And now I was actually here in my reality. Because for those 4 years, I was in that kind of victim, really what's wrong with me, again, looking for an answer externally outside of me. And then, therefore, again, all hindsight from the work I do now, I wasn't really here. So even just to take on information, to understand, not to fall back to that victim mentality was near on impossible because I wasn't really in the state to take on information or again, to have my worldview kind of change. So fundamentally what happened for me was that I began to help people physically move pain free or perform better. So I used to work with professional athletes. I used to work with people in pain. And through that work, they would come to me because I would train a certain way. So I began to explore different modalities. I created my own system. But through the work with these people and myself, I realized actually they're coming to me for this way of moving, but actually they're coming to me for education. They're coming for me for empowerment. They're coming to me for almost acceptance that they can trial and test and do certain things because they're afraid to do it, i.e. they're in this very fight or flight kind of mode. And anyone who's ever dove deep on pain, particularly over the last kind of 10, 15 years, the research is just vast. The more we understand about pain, the less we know, essentially. It's so multifactorial. Your individual pain, my individual pain is literally that. It's individual. So you may have shoulder pain, as may have I, but the actual experience of it and the reason why it's there is just so unique and it's so individual and so many things have an impact of why it's occurring and why that pain is there, what you have to do in order to kind of unpack that. So that was kind of the first involvement of me of the likes of, say, shadow work or diving deeper on emotions or past experience. And I was doing this, again, consciously, with helping people physically get out of pain. But yeah, it just gave me license, I suppose. It really helped people from a much more multifactorial lens. And really my whole rhyme and reason for that kind of, 7, 8 year period, we were uber successful in the fitness industry, was to educate people and to make them understand the power they have to transform how they move, but actually not to get out of pain or to get a physical result, but to explore how they move, to basically open up their worldview of, whoa, I'm here, I'm in control, and therefore I can actually explore life.
And that kind of opening up to explore, as we've sort of said, it's this facing of the unknown, in some sense, right? To explore, be it your body, be it physical pain, be it just moving forward in life and taking sort of leaps into new endeavors or whatever it may be. That comes with a certain degree of vulnerability, right? So can you tell me a time in your life where kind of embracing vulnerability has, and exploring vulnerability on that note of that last comment, has proved to be fruitful and beneficial for you?
Well, let's go to another worldview lens, Chris, that completely changed my life, which was me being successful. So this business became uber successful. So we were known nationally. We're actually pretty big in the UK and worldwide. We helped like over 20,000 people. And I became very successful externally. And I ended up getting lost in that identity. So I had a disconnect from my success. I had a disconnect from what the business, the life that I had created, because I threw everything into the business, i.e. myself, my time, my effort, and was essentially burnt out. So the piece of vulnerability came from me. I don't know if it came to me by choice. I had a nervous system breakdown where I had to stop. I said, do I want to actually do this thing that I said was my sole mission and to have that impact that I did have and that I was going to have? But I had to stop. So there was a month or two where I was in bed, I was lost. The business partner had to kind of run the whole business. But the real vulnerability piece for me then was the acceptance of, I don't know what's going on here. I don't know who I am. I don't know if I'll ever get back to being who I was. And that was a transition over that month or two period of the acceptance of, I don't know what's going on. And then through that vulnerability, through that acceptance, was ultimately the transmutation or the transformation of me, allowing to unfold in a more of I'd call it a more natural manner in my life over the last couple of years. But then maybe fundamentally understanding that this is what life is about. So that pain experience being one aspect, the business identity aspect being another part of it, but actually fundamentally they're all being the exact same thing. And this idea of life and the darkness and the light and the unfolding of the cycle of life is what I'm much more open to now as a result of that.
Yeah, there's two things that I love there, two messages that I really love in that. The first one is that pain, challenge, adversity, they're they're features, not a bug of life, right? They're parts of the process, and they maybe shouldn't be avoided. I mean, to a certain degree, like don't go out putting yourself in unnecessary suffering, but there is potentially stuff that can be garnered from suffering, right? That is um beneficial and transformative, like you say. So that's the first bit, and then also this idea of sort of voluntarily facing the unknown and accepting that that too is also a part of the great adventure of our lives. If we do the same thing every single day and we never expose ourselves to new challenges, then it's difficult to see where the growth would come from. So yeah, great messages. I also want to think about this idea, you were kind of obviously successful, right? And success is something that it seems in this modern day and age of social media and everyone kind of pushing something forward. Hustle culture has very much become kind of a prominent brand or prominent idea within the kind of online sphere of content. That very much to me, at least when I see it, it's this idea of you wake up at 3 a.m. and then you do your meditation, and then at like 3:15 you write your affirmations, and from 3 till 6 it's like you're going to be knackered, and then there's no people in it ever. There's no human beings. It's just like this solitary dude just grinding away. And yes, which is this idea of chasing success. But I do question how healthy it is. And I think you've obviously, one of the things I like about you, Brian, is that you've experienced this stuff. You've experienced it, and that makes you sort of, I think more equipped to talk about this. You've kind of seen what's at the end of that journey. But this idea of grinding, of success, of, I guess, financial success, whatever it may be, the kind of illusion of productivity, perhaps looking productive, seems to be very prominent in the culture with young people, and masculinity, I think, in particular. What do you think modern culture perhaps is getting wrong about masculinity at the moment?
We talked about this off podcast. But it was to step back in my own life for a second and then look at what my dad did. My dad was a great man, had 7 children. He worked 2 jobs, worked 6, 7 days a week, provided, but maybe wasn't emotionally there, but he couldn't be there because he was so busy. So I suppose number one, I was kind of shown, for want of a better word, what a man does, which is provide, which is work, which is take on that responsibility. So that would be my lens. And then even just, as you mentioned there about society, I deemed a good man to do what I did, which was to work. And the worst thing for me was I built this. I had a real mission here. I was happy. I wasn't necessarily doing this for the money. I was getting a lot of money and a lot of praise, but I was doing it because I had this mission and this vision that I wanted to kind of get out there. But I was just doing work. I let relationships kind of be on the back burner, my own health be on the back burner. And again, all knowingly and unknowingly thinking this is what success is going to kind of garner for me. But then to have that disconnect of something that I genuinely love, that the question, who am I and do I want this? That was just extremely scary because that was so clear and so defined. And then just to have this void of what the fuck is going, because I've done the thing, I have got what success has been deemed and shown to me throughout my lifetime. And yet this is nowhere near as peaceful or contented or the happiness I was expecting it to be. And then if I am to accept I'm lost and therefore let all this go, well, who the fuck am I? And what does that mean? I'm nothing and nobody. So, yeah, I think, especially today in society with the way social media is, I think it's even more difficult because I'm 39 years of age. So, if I was to grow up like social media, which I didn't have when I was younger, I believe being a salesman or getting all these 10, 20, 30K months is what a man is meant to do. And again, I've experienced it and I know the disconnect. I help clients through the disconnect. They have earned literal millions. And the question that comes back to me is this it? So yeah, I just think it's difficult because to have a conversation like this on social media is near impossible because social media is not a place you can genuinely learn. This clickbait material is obviously what gets noticed. And to actually stop and have an honest conversation about it is, well, it takes time and it takes nuance. And I don't think we're going to get that in social media. And then I would question as well, speaking from the eye, the ignorance and the immaturity of me. You can tell me all you want to tell me at 20, 7, 8 years of age. I've got to experience this fucking awfulness for myself because I'm not successful. I need that success until I genuinely go, now you're full of shit, man. I needed to kind of experience that. So that's the message I try to give off now, both in terms of my content and the work that I'm doing. It's a real clear passion of mine going forward. And I want to embody it and show my children that, success is not just financial. It's a hell of a lot deeper than that. But yeah, it's a very complicated, complex topic. I don't know if we can unpack that.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. And I think it's important that you kind of mentioned there that your initial sort of outward pursuits, at the time, they weren't superficial. They were a calling. It was sort of in there within you as meaningful at that time, right? To a point where you're pursuing that. And it makes me think of you and I somewhat connected through our mutual respect of the great Dr. James Hollis. And when I had him on the show, he talks about men often will, for them, it's out there. Everything we do is out there. We can fix ourselves out there, or we can, change things out there. We will climb the mountain, climb that career ladder, whatever it may be. Whereas actually the great adventure of our lives perhaps is inward and stopping. And you talked this idea about kind of falling into that different rest and digest kind of state, being able to, I guess, be more present in the moment as opposed to kind of forward thinking. I imagine some of those reflections that you had, especially when you get to a point where, who even am I? Your whole identity is, maybe not your whole identity, but I would imagine a large part of your identity is built up on this idea of yourself. And that idea of yourself has been built up over a long period of time through lots of hard work and genuine pursuit, of honest kind of pursuit of something. And then you get to this point and you have to question that. And I imagine that would take a lot of strength, a lot of courage, a lot of resilience to then engage in that dialogue with yourself to ask the question, am I where I want to be? And I think we put a lot of emphasis in the culture on strength and resilience being one more round, one more lap, go to the gym at this time, do it every day. Do you think culture, based on your interactions with people who come to you for support, do you feel like people perhaps aren't told enough about the strength and kind of resilience that it takes to go into that inner world, to go into those kind of depths of their own psyche and ask those difficult questions? Is that something that you find people find challenging when you encounter them?
I think so. Yeah, I think certainly from a general perspective, society will say that because you mentioned there, I think it's all about striving and more and external. But again, to stop and kind of look within, it requires a vulnerability and a connection to self that maybe isn't seen as strength or resilience. And I would agree in that sense. But if I just go back to my own journey for a second, as you mentioned there, and it's so true. I had this fear within me when I was striving and being successful and having the impact. And I remember distinctly being like, I don't want to sit with this because I didn't know what it was. I could feel it, but I didn't want to stop because when I stopped, all these negative thoughts would come barging up through me. And I believed if I am successful externally, if I have the impact externally, this will go away. And then it was all there, but it was still here. And fundamentally, that's why I had that breakdown because I couldn't shine a light on that uncertainty. I would call it fear, but even now, through my work, I actually would call it shame. But I just couldn't sit with it because I didn't understand it. And because I didn't understand it, it was the uncertainty that killed me. If I could say it was fear or shame, or I knew what it was, it'd be so much easier to stop. Because I didn't know what it was. The uncertainty was like, oh my God, I've got to fill this uncertainty with something else. And then if I was to with the question that you asked there, I think that's the whole point, because that's what a man does. I believe the man is going to find the answer and kind of grind through. And that's what you did in life, where I realize now, again, through my own process, never mind helping other people through it, that to actually stop and genuinely go, I don't know, or what I'm experiencing right now is literally the unknown or the uncertainty, despite having ideas of what it could be. takes so much strength and courage, and actually is the work, I believe. Because I would have had beliefs as well that if I stop this way of living and striving and driving, that I'm going to lose all the energy. If I'm stopping to actually sit with this, I would lose the motivation and the ambition that I have. But again, as I mentioned, in a being state, which I live in now and operate and create from now, I'm no longer having to be seen. I'm no longer having to strive. I'm actually content and peaceful. I still have ambition. I still want to have an impact. I still want to earn and create and connect, etc. But it's no longer from that uncertain unknowingness. It's actually being okay with sitting with the unknowingness and not actually being ruled by the darkness of it, and understanding that it's a necessary process to be alive and here and being and present.
Yeah, again, I think a great message to reaffirm that unknowing, that kind of mystery is a part of the human experience, because I think nowadays, and I partly speak from experience here, I'll preface it. So Jung, generally speaking, has this idea that we kind of, our psychic libido, so let's just call it, psychological energy, psychic energy, we can often go out into the world, and that energy will be out there sort of moving through the world into our projects, into our endeavors, into our relationships, everything that kind of society, I guess, expects of us to do. But then at certain points in life, we may like hit a wall, right? So we may, again, this sort of echoes what you were saying, things just aren't turning out in the world the way they used to. You're not feeling right. It's not flowing right. Something doesn't feel good. You might lose meaning in your perception. You might feel like everything feels flat and dull and monotonous and all of that. And Jung thought that was kind of the psyche's signal to you that you needed to then look within, much again, kind of like you did. You needed to stop. You needed to kind of maybe take some time away from, the endeavors, the projects, some of the people that you're around temporarily, to go inward and to kind of reorganize your frames of life, that you're kind of pre-imposing on the world, your expectations, readjust them with kind of a dialogue with yourself. And then when you kind of done that, again, I'm speaking very generally and like sort of basic here, but you could then go out into the world with those new frames, and hopefully the kind of symptoms that you were perhaps experiencing, and it might be like depression, anxiety, or just a general flatness, loss of meaning, that would hopefully be gone, at least partially. You're not necessarily going to go in and readjust everything perfectly, but enough to perhaps go out in the world and then find new experiences to do the whole process again, right? And it's this cyclical thing you're kind of talking about, that the sort of light and then into the darkness of your depths, and that cycle just sort of repeats throughout your life. But what I think's tricky for some people is when they hit that wall, they will fall into things like addiction and all sorts of destructive behaviors for that reason. God forbid that I look at whatever's in this box inside of me. God forbid I open Pandora's box of, has every decision I've ever made been the wrong one? Have I spent years climbing up a ladder, doing everything I could to get to the top, only to realize I'm up the wrong ladder? It's a horrible realization. And, again, it takes courage to do that. So I guess to a certain degree, this is kind of what you're doing. You're kind of facilitating this in your work, right? When people maybe get to these points in life, perhaps it's not completely disastrous points. Perhaps it's just these points where they're looking to maybe readjust, to kind of check in on where they're at and work on themselves. Let's call it that, right? Distill your coaching philosophy to like one core principle for me. Firstly, I want to expand on it, so I'm not going to hold you to that. But what's the kind of main principle that you kind of approach this with when you're engaging with people?
It's actually really simple. So the one core principle is being. So we need to get people into a being state, build a level of awareness. So you mentioned that fight or flight, more to that rest and digest state. But from that state, information can be garnered. We can trust what's coming through. We are not striving or searching for the answer outside of us. And from that state, it's a different way of living. So if I was to look at, say, my two businesses, so the initial movement mobility, pain. It was the exact same idea. In order for me to truly help someone, can I get them into a state? What happened to me, Chris, in that weekend? I got to a very being state. So I just had a being state and therefore could actually see reality for what it was, which was, whoa, much more vast and much more bigger than the lens I was looking through, which was just in that nervous system. It was so unstressed and frightened and looking for issues constantly. So that's fundamentally what I do is I help my clients get to a being state. And most of my clients experience what I did, which is striving and successful and pushing and demanding more. And you get to that state, as you mentioned, going like, I can't continue with this. Therefore, there's something wrong with me, or I no longer want this. I'm going to pull my whole life down. Before we decide to do anything, can we just get you present? Can we get you grounded in your current reality? Because then you can see the wood for the trees. And then you can decide, okay, well, how do I feel? What do I want for my life? And then how can I express myself honestly from this standpoint? And then we can actually cultivate that. The nervous system can adapt and live from that state forever. So no longer am I here helping you to get out of pain. No longer am I here to make you successful. I'm here to show you how to cultivate a nervous system that feels safe, to trust the unfolding of your true self, and then express that for a lifetime, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think that was a solid answer because one thing I find, right, this, the idea of being, right, it's very like, that is our essence, right? I mean, I'm quite into Heidegger, the kind of philosopher, I guess, and his work, Being in Time, it's all about a phenomenology of what it is to be a person. And he obviously talks about being a lot in this, and I'm not going to go into that, but it's very much like human beings, we're almost not this kind of, we're not a thing that is external to the world. Being itself is kind of tied up in the world, in that present moment, and being open to the unknown, which is something you talked about, being aware of what is coming up in that moment, as opposed to being, so driven and focused, which on the surface seems like a good thing. But I think you fall into the danger of what Jung and Marie-Louise von Franz called this idea of the provisional life, which is when I get the car, when I get to this point in my career, when I get the relationship, when I get married, when I have a child, then I'll be happy. And the problem is that always moves, the sort of destination always moves as you move towards it. And before you know it, you've got to a point in your life, maybe near the end of your life, and you haven't lived your life. And I think what you're saying about bringing people back into the present, it not only increases the sort of bang for your buck that you're getting from life, because you're hopefully more in tune, more engaged with the richness of being and experience. But as you've alluded to with your own experiences, doors open, doors and experiences become unveiled to you, and you become more attuned to listening to what in the world is beckoning to you to do. And that ultimately, again, from your experiences, it seems, has transformative effect and allows you to, in the being, subsequently become something new. And then that becoming leads to more being and more becoming, right? It's this kind of great core principle, I think, to have, because it just puts you right where you need to be, to not only experience the richness of life, but also to get the lay of the land of all the opportunities, authentic opportunities, true to you, that are there for you. So,
yes, can I just hop in there for a second? Because there's so much there, gold there, right? Because you mentioned there about the provisional personality. I think that's so true that we end up having these identities that are successful. And you mentioned, but we kind of get up to a stage going, this is no longer good enough. This success, this purpose now has reached its limit. And we think that's bad. It's actually a huge opportunity, because I'm going to say to your audience, because I'm guessing your audience could maybe connect with this a little bit as well. In that being state, there's no Brian, there's no Chris, there just is. So then it becomes that idea of I am. So there's nothing. And therefore, because I am, what follows that? Everything, anything. And that's the joys of that. It's a really paradoxical nature of life. And that's what I understand now through this level of work, is that the good, the bad, the night, the day, the fear, the love, the right, the left, the success, the failure, they're essentially the exact same thing. And me, what I did was I need the success. I need the love. Get rid of the failure. Get rid of the fear. But when you can genuinely be in reality, and hold that paradoxical nature of life, you become nothing, and therefore you can potentially become anything, everything. And it's really weird because I still have ambition. My clients still want to have an impact. They still want to live their life, but you trust the unfolding. You trust yourself to make decisions, not to be seen, not to get something externally, but actually to have that intuition and that trust. And it's one that is unfolding for a lifetime. There's no real answer to find in that sense, but a deeper trust is what I'm experiencing and what I want to continue to experience in my lifetime, essentially.
Yeah. And I think we talked about kind of these, I guess, the sort of narratives that people tell themselves earlier. I think it's really hard to spot as well sometimes when you're in it. You know, that you talk about that being nothing, being no thing, and going into the world as such. I would ask everyone to sort of try and catch themselves the next time they say, like, just as something really small. It might be like, oh, I don't like Marmite. And you might be like forming that basis of your identity. You know, I know Marmite isn't at the sort of the core of all identity structure, but you might be saying, I don't like Marmite. And the thing that made you say that may have happened when you were 5 years old, right? And you might have it now, and you might be like, actually, I quite like it because your taste buds change, you know, your preferences change and whatever else. Now, that's Marmite. And, you know, I speak from experience. I never used to like Marmite. And then as I got older, I did. So the advertising's all wrong there. So they need to change that. It's not love it or hate it. It's, I don't know, maybe they need to put something about being and becoming in the Marmite logo, perhaps. But what I'm saying is, if that can happen for Marmite, then you can scale it up. You know, and it can happen for these larger kind of, you know, narratives we tell about ourselves. It might be that, oh, I'm just not good in public. I'm not a good public speaker. You know, I can't do this. I had it. I did my first talk. I submitted a paper. I got invited to do a talk at the Psychology in the Other conference in this university in London. And I was on a panel with like professionals. Now, I don't know if anyone's noticed from this podcast or the videos I put out, but I am effectively an idiot, right? So I'm doing my best to sort of do this work and, you know, put out my thoughts and my ideas, but I have limited knowledge and I know the tools in my toolbox. But I was, you know, on a panel with professionals who, you know, qualified and they know this stuff clinically. And I was telling myself a lot building up to the talk that I'm not a great public speaker. I get quite nervous. I'm, blah, 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 whatever it may be. And I did my planning, whatever else. And then as soon as I walked up there and I started talking, all of a sudden, I was like I was out of body experience and I was watching myself do it. And I was like, who is this guy that's talking? Because the guy that's talking is talking with confidence, is, you know, dropping a few little jokes in there, getting a few laughs, whatever it may be. There was a flow and an authenticity to it that was comfortable. And after that talk, I walked away and said, oh, I'm going to do this podcast now. I'm going to start that podcast because that was one of the narratives, the stories that I was telling myself that, oh, I can't talk to camera. I can't do this, you know. And it was just built up from a view of myself probably like 15 years ago. And in those 15 years, I had changed. I had obviously developed. And again, could have been if I kept telling myself that story, if I hadn't put myself into the unknown, then yeah, could have been stuck, you know, in that. So I do think it's a great message. So I want to move on, kind of taking some of these ideas into the world that we're like living in now, somewhat of a crazy world at times. In this kind of the world of kind of noise that we have and distractions and things like that, what do you suggest is a good way for people? And you might say what we've already talked about, but if you can maybe expand, a good way for people to start trying to find their own story, their own myth, perhaps in Jungian terms, their own calling. Once they get into this you know, embodied state, this kind of being state, how then do they start trying to separate their own calling that is calling from within them from all the noise and advice that we kind of hear out in the world? You got any tips on that, or
Yeah,
any
well,
experiences?
I don't know if I said to you before, but the idea of truth being transformation, you know? So I think firstly, that's the very first thing that you have to trust. And that truth could be, I don't know. That truth could be, this thing is not for me. The truth could be, I need some help. The truth is not often, you know, the lovely thing that you think you are chasing or that you need right now. And so again, from that being state, I think there's a veil that is thinned. You have more trust in of what is unfolding. And the natural next step is truth. But like any kind of adaptation, if you to use the body analogy in the gym, it takes time. So you soften into that change. But fundamentally, what for me with clients or with myself, if I am struggling or I'm trying to make a decision, like what's the simplest, smallest thing that I can do right now in order to lean into truth? That's really what I would kind of encourage. And that could be a conversation. That could even just be an acknowledgement. That could be staying in bed all day. You know, as of right now, what you need, I don't necessarily mind, but I think it's a muscle, it's a trusting, and that you kind of consistently do, and momentum or the unfolding, or at least the evidence that you get from that gives you the confidence to keep kind of leaning into that. And that's what I would have struggled with, say, you know, of the experiences I've mentioned, is that a lot of this for me was unconscious. So to stop and ask these questions, stop and reflect. So Jung would talk about the importance of reflection and it being a key component of shadow work. The reason why people struggle with that is because, you know, the truth is difficult. Of the unknowing, of the uncertainty, of a decision that we potentially made that didn't go our way, and therefore, quote unquote, that's on me. But if you go back to that being state that we talked about, and we're saying you just are, so I am, there doesn't have to be a lens or a projection of emotion or a demigration of, you know, I'm a piece of shit or I'm a victim, because if you just are in that being state, the truth naturally unfolds and you trust that through the process of doing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love that line. And when we've previously spoken and you dropped the truth in the, what is it? Truth in the truth is the transformation. Truth in the,
Truth is the transformation. Yeah. Truth is the transformation. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that line. I've always thought of truth as a really good orientating principle, you know, because if you speak it, if you kind of live it, then in some sense, even if things go wrong, well, you had some sort of axiom there or whatever it was that you were kind of orientating yourself on, that if there's anything you could just try and put faith in and trust, it would be that, wouldn't it? It's a metric that only you can kind of say, I can be sure that whatever happens, I've done, at least I can follow this, you know, I can follow this sort of compass in the world. And if I get lost, then so be it. You know, at least I didn't take someone else's directions or whatever else may be. Yeah, I think that's good. So, okay, I want to go into a little bit more about the coaching. So, tell me about foundation, creation, and exploration. We've talked about being in this being state. Tell me a little bit more about this element of it.
Yeah, so this has been a coaching framework I've developed over the last 16 years through all of the coaching I've done, whether that be you know, physical, emotional, mental. And it's just a process that has helped me, help my clients to get into that being state and to express honestly in their world. And the foundations are quite simply that, the foundation, physically, mentally, and emotionally, giving you an understanding of self, giving you a presence that many people don't have in their life right now. And then from that foundations, the doing unfolds. So before the doing becomes the being. So that foundations phase being key before we look to act, before we look to do, because at least when we're here, as you just mentioned there about the truth reveals itself. So it's not an answer you have to go and seek. It naturally is a byproduct of being more in that being state. So I help clients create systems, and these can be quite simple. If you were to look at, again, shadow work, reflection, and systems to get organized, again, playing with your children, you know, putting the phone down and genuinely going, I'm going to play with my children for the next 5 or 10 minutes with no distraction. Because if you were to say what we're saying here around being, again, I've got 2 kids and this is what's so evident. They live in this being state. So in order for you to be more present, just start playing with your kids. And as a byproduct of them emitting this energy of being, you naturally, well, it brings it up in you and you begin to trust that more and you can bring that exact same energy into your life. So that foundations phase is key. Because once you have that foundations, number one, you can never lose it. The nervous system begins to adapt and embody. You have a level of awareness you can never lose. Now, you don't have to act from that state. The awareness is so great that you will feel such a dis-ease by not living in alignment with who you are and from that beingness that you know you're not being truthful to yourself. And the phase after that is creation. So this is where I believe every single person should live. And I believe most of my clients are trying to be in the creation phase without the foundations phase. So they don't have the beingness and are there trying to strive and create and have purpose like I was. But it's a byproduct because once you have that beingness and those foundations, we can then co-create. I help my clients co-create again their life, their connectedness, what they want. But you are expressing from a much more grounded state. You're no longer searching. You're no longer dying to be seen because you understand the depth that it is within you. And that creation phase, then we start to consciously go towards the unconscious. We just look a little bit deeper, knowingly what this means. We now aren't afraid of what the answers are coming up, knowing it's an exploration. And from there, it's just a different way of living completely. Then after that is exploration. And exploration, Chris, is what me and you do. And not everyone is interested in diving deep, deep, deep. I would call this otherworldly, God, psychedelics, the unconscious, dream work. I don't really know what it is, but I certainly love exploring it. And it's going to be a lifetime for me to explore. But I do believe every single person in the world should be living in creation phase. And I believe it's available to every single person. It's just about, again, changing the purview of the questions you ask yourself, having an understanding of self, and then therefore expressing yourself honestly in your life.
Yeah, and I think it's good to have that framework, and I really like the framework. I think obviously I've said in previous little chats we've had that that foundation element, your sort of just say even like the personal relationships with your family and things like that. I know from my own experience that when I'm creating, when I'm doing something like this, and this takes time and effort and whatever it may be, I know it flows better. I know it feels better, and I know the end product is better when I've, be it spoken to my mum that week, taken my partner out for dinner and spent some time in their presence and just done that and not had my mind on this. When I do come back to it, knowing that all those sort of foundational things are, for the most part, at least sort of being attended to and cultivated enough, hopefully more than enough, I'd like to think that things work better, I think is great. And I think you're right. There's, people, if they perhaps haven't got that and they're in this kind of middle phase when they're trying to strive and whatever it may be, it becomes quite difficult, if you're kind of being pulled back or the things that haven't been settled in that foundation phase are playing on their minds. I also think there's a huge danger in that final phase, and you talk about kind of exploring the depths of the psyche. I think too many people nowadays will start doing that when their foundation phase, the foundation element of their life isn't in the best place, perhaps. And that's, I think, when we actually get into the real dangers of kind of...
But I think it's really important because people do. I've done psychedelics for the last 5-6 years, with shaman and worked with great people. And I see it time and time again where people are at that exploration phase with no understanding of self, but no real systems or tools to actually navigate and integrate the lessons that they may learn at these kind of experiences. And like I said, there are levels to this for a reason. I'm not saying the levels I have are perfect and everyone should do it this way, but in the sense of if you want to get the most expression and honest truthfulness from yourself and your life, that there are levels to this because otherwise you're just having experiences, which can be lovely, can be terrifying. But what are you genuinely bringing into your life? What are you genuinely bringing to people you love, to yourself? And how are you ultimately, then able to integrate that? Because that's what I see in terms of these other worlds that potentially people are searching for something and in turn actually not, focusing on the right things essentially.
Yeah. I mean, there's the old adage of, these kind of spiritual ideas where you can go up into the mountains, right? But you have to come back down into the valley. You have to do your chopping wood and your carrying water in life, because if you go up into the mountains forever, you'll die, right? It's as simple as that. You can't spend your life chasing these peak experiences and being, I think Jason Silver calls it, you're a bliss junkie. You're addicted to peak experience because perhaps I don't want to say mundanity, because I think the kind of day-to-day elements of our life can be rich and fulfilling and can have deep meaning sort of permeate through them. I think it takes time to be able to notice that and cultivate that within ourselves. But I do think many people are chasing this kind of peak experience, and it can be very, very addictive to say like, oh, I've just looked into the face of God or whatever it may be through some psychedelic experience. I want to do that every Thursday. And it's like, okay, like, as Alan Watts said, when you get the message, maybe hang up the phone, because I think there's danger to it, isn't there? There is danger in chasing that. And ultimately, I think it's got a trickster element to it, because it has a sense of those experiences, and it may be psychedelics, it may be, cannabis, it may be even
Even
just
like
sort of
breath work and these things, or the other retreats.
yeah, exactly, just sort of general spiritual practice. You may be chasing that and chasing the experiences through that. They are enticing because they are numinous, and they have a feeling to them that you almost want to treat with reverence, and it feels so deeply meaningful. But I think that does not mean that they are not, I think anything numinous, like anything that emerges within your psyche that has that numinous quality, can both warm and burn you, like any kind of powerful experience. And I think, yeah, it's a danger. It could be seen as still a running from the real issue, a running from yourself, a running from those sort of reflections and questions that perhaps we need to be asking ourselves. So yeah, I think it's that, yeah, the three tiers of that.
And
I
even,
think
if I people just unpack that a bit more, because you said there, because it's the work I do, and I really believe in this of the everyday, because Jung would talk about, you get to a level and you start to see the depth of life, with the archetypes, the narratives, the stories, the symbols. And I believe that's available to everyone, maybe not with that depth until you do an awful lot of work. But Tony Robbins has a great framework where he talks about the human needs, which would be variety, growth, contribution, love, connection, significance, and certainty. So just those six, right? So for me, I really identify with growth and contribution. So what did I do, Chris, for my career? I tried to grow and contribute just professionally, and everything else fell by the wayside. But actually, in my own life now, knowing those two are really fundamental and they drive me as a human, I can now look at my children, my relationship. I can look at any aspect of my life, my hobbies, learning, because growth and contribution are everything. So I can just drop in deeper to any aspect of my life that's so far removed than just being successfully external in one avenue. And again, that's available to us. We can kind of understand that a little bit more than maybe some of these deeper understandings, but we can build towards that. And I just think it's really exciting, because when you can start to get, again, real presence and beingness from not changing much in your life, it's like, fucking hell, what could I do? What could I experience? What kind of connection or impact could I have in my life? And that's really exciting, because then we have a lifetime to explore.
yeah, exactly. And I think that's perhaps an overall message. We talk about chasing peak experience, and although these peak experiences have their place, perhaps chasing them could maybe not be fruitful. And you talk about being in the moment, in your kind of noticing of what is coming up both in the world and in yourself every day. That to me, I think is the core here. Like, I preach on this podcast a lot that I really do think we do live in somewhat of a disenchanted world where everything feels quite mechanical, and modern sciences has told us that, matter is just matter and it's dead matter or whatever it may be. And the world is somewhat stripped of magic, at least on the surface. Now, the problem is we do sort of project that need for enchantment onto things anyway, and that's a whole other conversation for another day. You can go check out some of the videos on the page if you want to see me talk about some of that stuff. But yeah, I think what I will always say is there is magic, there is mystery in your everyday life, right? In the doing of the normal things, the people in your life that you perhaps are maybe used to, or the tasks that you think you're used to and are kind of boring. I think if you can move into those spaces of the doing of those things with like curiosity, with openness, with playfulness, with whatever it may be, all of a sudden you'll open up those same tasks, will just open up a whole array of like new experiences, right? To kind of engage with you, to question you, to prod at you, to ask you about yourself. Do you see what I mean?
100%. As you're explaining there, because this is, again, the work I do, I believe this is that it's all a remembering. And how do we know? Because look at our children. Our children are in this state. They are fascinated by everything they are playing and the responsibilities of life. Again, our provisional personalities, these identities that are so rigid and so real. And eventually we come up against to go, no, it's just a remembering of what we were. You know, we were in that state. We were in that being state. And we can play with our business. We can play with our life. We can be curious. We can be creative just for the sake of being curious and creative. And often as a byproduct of that, you can succeed. You can have an impact. You can build. You can create. But again, I'm speaking from the I here. No longer do I need to be seen. And I needed to be seen unconsciously. This wasn't very conscious. I'm not saying I was succeeding and being kind of going, yeah, he thinks I'm deadly. This was all unconscious within me. And again, by me stopping, by my sitting with that fear or that shame, I'm able to accept, become much more whole and not be ruled by that. And now actually be here and make a much more intentional decision of how I want to live, act, and ultimately lead, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that idea of sort of realizing that you don't need permission from anyone else to live the life that you want to live. Now, I'll caveat that and say that doesn't mean running off to Bali and, you know, leaving your family to go and take psychedelics or whatever forever. I think there's a degree of responsibility that we all must take on in life, for you know, for ourselves really to grow and to develop. But yeah, I think you're right. Not living your life by the kind of dictates of other people and trying to figure out where that is happening unconsciously. How are you holding yourself back? Do you really like Marmite? Are you actually a good public speaker or an okay public speaker like myself? You know, or do you need to shift your perception on your physical limitations and the things that you think you're capable, like you did? Or is it time to look into, you know, going into the depths of your inner world like you did and engaging with things differently and becoming more present and focused on being? Yeah, I think it's a solid message. And I think
And
what I love
I'd
go
even
on.
say as well, though, because I think it's a huge thing, is to redefine success. Because I was externally successful. Everyone was telling me how great I was. I was sitting there beside my child and was not there. Emotionally, I was not there. And that wasn't success to me. That couldn't be success. I could have more trappings and more success externally, but I wasn't. I emotionally, I was not here, and that was an opportunity. I leveraged it and used it to be like, okay, no, there's something going on here. I've got to stop and start to question and then look within and redefine success. And by redefining success, it's just a new opportunity for success. It's not a letting go of all the worldly possessions that you may still want to have, but we now get an opportunity to find that success, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's the great way to put it, opportunity. You know, I would say that if people are coming up against these kind of walls in life, these sort of psychological walls, feeling a bit stuck, feeling a bit lost, even suffering, obviously, as a result of that or whatever it may be, try and reframe it as an opportunity, right? To see that it's not, oh no, this is not just going to weigh me down. This is like a chance. This is my brain or my psyche telling me to look at this. To then, if I can face it, if I have the courage to face it forthrightly, as we've said, a lot of what you did took a lot of courage to potentially stare at the fact that your whole identity might have crumbled under the pressure. And luckily, obviously, all of it didn't. And you were lucky to see new things about yourself and then recognize and, like you said, reevaluate what success is, which opened up a whole new load of opportunities, not just, I guess, in what you do, but where it matters, right? With your kids and your family, to be more present, to be more embodied. And I think that's such a good message. So, Brian, let's bring this thing home. I'm going to ask you one more question, and it's a bit of a big one, but if someone is kind of at that point, perhaps things just don't feel quite right, perhaps, you know, they got the good job, they've got the money's coming in, they've got a relationship, it's okay, you know, things are going fine. But something, you know, in the back of their mind is lingering, this idea of maybe things not being totally perfect or not quite where they need to be. What's a good question they can ask themselves?
A good question. Well, I could go a little bit deeper because I don't know if I can give them one question, but I want to give them something that fundamentally kind of helps myself and my clients. I always talk about two things: capacity and space. So capacity, we can look at physically, mentally, and emotionally, and space, we can call it the void. Yeah, so the quietness of life and you just being as opposed to distracting or working or striving. So a lot of us will struggle to be in the space, in the void, in the quietness. So rather than having to sit there or again meditate or find the answer to this void, I always look at capacity first. So two simple things. I'll give you three simple things that I'm going to encourage people to do. If you're in that state right now, rather than asking a question, there's three things I'm going to encourage you to do. Don't go on your phone for the first hour every single morning. So make that a standard and non-negotiable and do this for the next 4 weeks, we'll say. I don't care what you do. Decide whatever you want to do, but you're not allowed to go on your phone. The second thing is to drink more water. I'm going to give you a formula of 40 mils multiplied by your body weight in kg. So 40 mils by 80 kg is 3.2 liters of water. It's a lot of water. You will be pissing furiously, build up to it, and your body will adapt over time. And then number three is to, what would I say? The best thing I can say here, really, I suppose, is try to lean a little bit more into truth. That's all I'll kind of say. So no phone, more water, and more truth. And if you give yourself 4 weeks of genuinely doing that every single day, let's just see how you get on. Because the idea is with the space, you're no longer being ruled by external. You can decide what you want to do, but I'm pretty confident it'd be easier to get into a being state, having just woken up. The water, most people are dehydrated. We're increasing your capacity to be here right now. Physically, mentally, emotionally, you are much sharper. Therefore, be in the reality and to actually see the truth is much, much easier. And then to express the truth, it just takes time. So maybe that truth is I'm fucking lost right now. And in a week or two, it's like, oh, you say something to your missus or to your children or to a friend, but you trust the truth that is being asked of you day to day. And through the consistent nature of that, we just see what it kind of reveals. But I suppose fundamentally, the underlying message of that is that there's no real answer to find. That you're not really missing something. It's going to feel like you are. But if you can just have the capacity and confident after about 4 weeks, you might actually be able to be in that space, in the void, a little bit easier. And if you can kind of sit in the quietness for a minute, 5 or 10 longer, you have an element of trust, an element of beingness that will fundamentally change your worldview forever. And I really mean that because I see it all the time with clients. And when you can have that state and go, I've done nothing, but I feel better. That's the opportunity that we're talking about.
Love it. When you were talking there, I felt like I was sort of getting myself kitted out in some sort of like medieval village to go out into the psychological forest of life, into the unknown, with nothing but truth with me. And I felt like secure. I felt this, I've got this. Brian, look, I really appreciate you. I think you are a really insightful voice out there in a sea of just sort of sometimes chaotic information, and it can be really hard to kind of find, I think, authentic voices who I think walk what they talk. And I think it's very clear that you do that. And I think what you're promoting in terms of being present, how to go about cultivating the kind of structures that put you in a position in the world to engage with it, to go forthrightly into the adventure that is your life with no expectations necessarily, just to face the unknown, to not hold on to too much of who you are and what is going to happen, with the aim being that you will become in that process, I think is such a great message. So I really appreciate you. It's been really great to talk through this stuff some more. Where can people find you currently, Brian?
Probably Instagram is the best place. So Brian, I think it's Brian O'Loughlin, I think is what it is, or the Brian O'Loughlin podcast maybe is what it is. Probably the best place.
I'll put it in the description on YouTube below, so people can find it.
Well, if I would say to you, Chris, thank you so much, man. We've had a great conversation over the last few weeks. I'm loving your podcast. I'm loving the work that you're doing. And for me, leaning more into this way of living and coaching and thinking over the last couple of years, I'm meeting more great people like yourself. So it's just cool, I think, that we are leaning into, again, the unknown, the uncertainty, and, exploring it eventually.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. I mean, I've said it a few times on this podcast that I think one of the greatest things about it is getting to have conversations with people, but I build these connections with people, and you reached out to me and we had a little chat sort of prior to the episode. And it's great. I absolutely, I am seeing firsthand, as I'm sure you do as well, the kind of the wonder of living the adventure of your life just by following the things that feel true to who you are, right? So
yeah. I love that. And then what I'd
Fantastic.
also like, Ferry, is get you over in Ireland and you can be on my podcast. It has to be in person. I don't do online specifically because of the issues we've had over the last 2 days.
You're going to get me in person, and then everyone's going to realize that I'm actually just AI. I'm just AI here. This is all an illusion. People, I think the other day was the first time on social media I showed my legs properly. So people now know I have legs, which is which is insightful, slowly revealing more about myself as time goes on. But yeah, I would love that. I think that would be absolutely fantastic. So yeah, I'm sure we can make that happen, no doubt. Listen, Brian, I urge everyone to go check out what you're doing, to go follow you on Instagram, to listen to the insights you have to say. Yeah, it's such a great message. And I look forward to seeing what comes from you and your truth and going out into that adventure of life. I think it's going to be, I think there's more great things to come.
Thanks so much, man. You're a gent.
You're very welcome.